welcome back. Joining me is Samir Patel from the Fort Wayne Philharmonic, and he's here to talk about the rest of the 2012 Masterworks season. Samir, good to have you back on the show.
It's great to be back. Thank you.
You know, we're kind of over the hump and heading towards the end of the season, but this season has really been marked by something different at the Philharmonic. The audience was able to actually choose some of the music that the Philharmonic is set to play. Tell us a little bit about the audience choice concert.
Sure. We had several rounds in which we invited the audience to vote for the music they would like to hear in concert. And so what we did was we set up voting online. We set up voting as well in person at our Embassy Theater concerts. And we had a big red box where they could go ahead and vote for which composers and which pieces they would like to see on a concert. And we did this by allowing them to vote for an overture, a concerto, and a symphony. And they've all voted and responded. And
so now we're going to hear their selections. That's going to be on March 3rd here at IPFW at the Reinhardt Music Center. But kind of an interesting mix of music that we're going to hear.
Absolutely. The program begins with Debussy's Clair de Lune, timeless classical piece in some ways. I shouldn't say classical, but I mean that in the sense that everybody's heard it, whether it's in a movie or
it's very beautiful stuff.
It's a beautiful piece, and the concert will begin with Clair de Lune, and then we have a guest artist, a young American violinist, Nigel Armstrong, joining us to perform Vivaldi's Four Seasons, and then closing the concert will be Copland's Appalachian Spring.
Well, all of those sound very familiar to those of us who've listened to classical music for a while, and it sounds very, very exciting.
Yes, and actually one of the additions on that program is that we'll be performing a Slavonic dance by Dvorak, which came in a very, very close second to the Debussy, so we're throwing that in there.
Was there one that came in a very, very strong favorite of the four, or is that kind of privileged information?
That's in some ways privileged information.
All right. I know which one I like the best, but I'm not.
Oh yeah, we all have our favorites from the list, but they're all great pieces, and I know the audience will really enjoy hearing them.
Okay, great. Well, we're here talking with Samir Patel from the Fort Wayne Philharmonic. Coming up March 17th, we have Guest and Grand Masters. That's back at the Embassy Theater.
Correct.
And that's going to be another Masterworks. And you're going to be doing some Russian music.
Yes,
that evening.
And we are thrilled to have two guest artists joining us. The first is Elena Urioste, a very talented American violinist who will be playing Shostakovich's first violin concerto. And that piece has a very interesting history. And then we also have a very accomplished guest conductor, Matthias Baumert, Swiss-born maestro, who'll be joining us, and he'll be leading the concerto, of course, but also in the second half of the program, we'll be featuring Prokofiev's Romeo and Juliet.
You know, you said that the Shostakovich violin concerto has a very, very interesting story. It was actually banned, was it not, when it first came out?
Yeah, Shostakovich had a very difficult time with the Soviet authorities, and in that piece, he composed it, in the late 1940s, but because he wasn't in favor with those authorities, he held off the premiere until the late 1950s, after Stalin had died and sort of the air had cleared, and much of the Soviet authorities' work then turned to banning literary works and not so much musical works, and so he saved that to be premiered in the end of the 50s, and so.
You know, he really had, Shostakovich really had a very kind of tragic life under Stalin.
Yes.
Fell out of favor, was constantly in fear of writing music that will offend, Papa Joe. And yet, you're featuring another Russian composer that evening, Prokofiev.
Sure.
Also the same time period. How did the two fare differently?
Well, that's a very interesting question, because Prokofiev, he died in the early 50s. And Stalin died around the same time, but Shostakovich lived, a couple decades. Yeah. Longer. And so Prokofiev's, he had a very interesting history because he actually lived in the West for part of his life. He lived in the United States, he lived in Europe, and he returned to Russia as a very successful composer, and he only towards the end of his life did he have some, battles with the Soviet authorities facing his music. But Shostakovich, on the other hand, he was constantly, like you said, in fear of writing a work that they would not
know.
like. And very often what would happen in those days was a composer or a performer would perform something, and days later they would disappear in the middle of the night and be sent to Siberia or be killed.
I think it's, and that's what's fascinating about listening to this concerto for those of us who are going to have the privilege of going, is that you have to listen to it with the knowledge that the person who wrote it was writing under the fear that just by writing it, they might go to the gulag.
Exactly.
It was a life. Art. It was a life and death game in Stalin Russia, and this is just a great example of it that the Philharmonic is bringing here. We, kind of moving on. April 21st, a concert called All Grown Up Now, featuring a young pianist, Ilya Yakushev.
Correct.
And he's going to be doing another Prokofiev.
Yes, Prokofiev makes a return appearance about a month later. He'll be performing Prokofiev's third piano concerto, which is, as a pianist, it's a blockbuster piece. It's one of those pieces that you go and you dazzle an audience with it. It's a stunning display of virtuosity and just a great piece overall. And so we're thrilled to have him join us for that concerto.
And that's going to be back at the Embassy Theater.
That's correct.
On that one. Moving on, though, coming up on May 12th, My End is My Beginning. Kind of a strange title.
Yes.
And I'm not going to ask you what it means, but of course it's going to be featuring one of the major works of the 20th century, Stravinsky's The Rite of Spring.
Right.
And tell us a little bit about that piece of music and maybe its importance.
Yes. So the program begins with Beethoven's Overture to the Creatures of Prometheus, which was actually a ballet, and then we move on to The Rite of Spring. And that piece, at its premiere almost 100 years ago, caused riots at the first performance in Paris.
In Paris, yeah.
And still to this day, as a musician, I know this is a sentiment shared among many of my colleagues, and that is we get goosebumps whenever we go to a performance of The Rite of Spring, because in some ways it still sounds so modern, still so crazy as it must have 100 years ago.
Yeah.
And so that's a very, very exciting ballet that we'll be performing, of course, the concert version of it, the concert piece. And then closing the concert is Mozart's Requiem, his last piece, his last great piece, and it was actually unfinished, his deathbed. And so we're thrilled to be joining forces with the Philharmonic Chorus to be performing his beautiful, beautiful Requiem.
It is really, really beautiful. It's a Requiem is a piece of music written for the dead, right? And it's been made famous by the movie Amadeus, of course.
Exactly.
For those of us who've seen the movie, the Grim Reaper knocks at the door.
Absolutely. There's
and
that
says,
haunting.
Mozart, you must compose this. And a lot of people feel that he was composing it for himself, but maybe that's
right. There's
fiction.
that haunting element of impending death.
Yes.
And so it's an extraordinary work, and so it's a great way to end the season.
And I think that just the space in between those two works, the Rite of Spring about being born and renewal of spring, and then the Requiem, just the total opposite. Isn't that kind of amazing?
It's amazing. It's going to be a great concert.
We'll talk a little bit about another concert that's coming up, but it's going to be called Mozart Revealed, which is sort of a theatrical production.
Right.
And what's interesting is that the Philharmonic's actually going to be holding auditions for anybody who's interested.
Correct.
And that's going to be on March 2nd and 3rd. If you're interested, just call 481-0770 to audition for Mozart Revealed, and that will be performing on April 27th and 29th. But moving on a little bit, talking about some of your, some of your jobs here at the Philharmonic, Samir. You're really involved with the educational aspect of the Philharmonic and making sure that young people learn music. And tell us a little bit about what you do.
Sure. So much of this season so far, the last time I saw you was back in November, and we were just about to go into holiday season at the Philharmonic, which, as you know, is a very busy time of the year. We do pop shows at the Embassy Theater. I take the orchestra, and we join the many different communities outside of Fort Wayne. We join them up with the Philharmonic and perform holiday pops repertoire, and we also partner with the ballet and do Nutcracker performances. But in the springtime especially, my role shifts a lot towards education performances, and it's something that's a big passion of mine, and I'm very lucky to have several concerts where we either are performing at the Embassy Theater, our Young People's Concerts, which happen at the beginning of May, or we are taking the orchestra on the road again, and we go to the surrounding communities, and we have a great piece by Chicago-based composer Jim Stevenson called Compose Yourself, and we'll be performing that at local schools as well. And then on top of that, we are also doing some concerts in what we call a side-by-side model, and that is we feature young musicians and we pair them up with the Philharmonic live in concert. So the first one will happen at the Fame Festival,
which is coming up in March.
Which is coming up in March, and we'll feature the Fort Wayne Philharmonic Youth Symphony, and we'll be performing music from Rimsky-Korsakov's Scheherazade and Copland's Variations on Shaker Melody. And we'll be having the orchestra seated next to Philharmonic Youth Symphony musicians.
Wow.
Exactly. So it's great to give them that opportunity. And as you know, music is almost always cooler when you see young musicians sitting next to, you know, something like the Fort Wayne Philharmonic. And so to give young audiences that exposure of really talented young musicians.
It's a great experience for the young musicians to sit next to a real pro like that. You know, like, play a little faster, kid. Right?
Exactly.
Nudge them on the arm a little bit.
And they really enjoy that experience as well. The Philharmonic musicians really enjoy the mentorship that comes along with that experience.
But this really is a great program that you run over there, you know, the Young People's Concerts at the Embassy Theater, and going out into the community. You could take your kid can learn a little bit about classical music and something that they can enjoy for the rest of their life.
Absolutely, and that's the way we see it. You know, we just did a family concert here at IPFW a couple weeks ago, and the audience was huge, and they just had a great time, and we partnered with the Fort Wayne Ballet to present that. So it's just great to collaborate with different organizations, such as Fame, such as the Ballet Company, and really bring music into people's lives.
Well, you know what? We're lucky to have you. We're lucky to have the Philharmonic here in this community. It's really a special thing for young people to be exposed to. Samir, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
For more information about the Fort Wayne Philharmonic or how to buy tickets, visit them at fwphil.org or call them at their box office at 481-0777. Arts Weekly airs every week, Tuesday through Thursday on College Access Television, and most Sundays on WFWA PBS 39. You can also see us on YouTube and Facebook and follow us on Twitter. I'm Chuck O'Connor. Thanks for tuning in to Arts Weekly. Join me next week with guests Philip Cole-Glazer and Robert Showquist from the Fort Wayne Civic Theater, and Chad Nicholson and Aaron Mitchell from the IPFW Department of Music.